is the fire marshal called and says, stay out of the aisles. And besides, it looks neat to see everybody boogie in front of their own seat. It's like the space shuttle or something. It has a sense of order. Watch out up there. As you notice when you come down on those upper balconies, it's steep and sudden. And if you're chemically uncertain, go down backwards on your hands and knees. Yeah, I wore white last night, trying to coax the dead into wearing white, and talked to Garcia about if he wouldn't take his black T-shirt off. I'll tell you a secret. He tattooed that on. It's been on, for 8 years. See, it saves in laundry bills like mad. Okay. The Dreadful Great.
Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphone so you can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. I can't thank you enough for making this part of your day today, and had a very, very divine opportunity last winter to attend the Springfield Creamery Christmas party in Eugene. I was a guest of George Walker's and Ken Babbs, and got to meet a lot of people that I really never thought I'd get a chance to meet. And one of them is my next guest, a guy who has been dwelling in the psychedelicized region of Eugene for quite some time and was incredibly close to the Kesey family, and also an alchemist of sorts that I look forward to vetting today. And as I continue forward on my book project about the Merry Pranksters, I know my guest will provide enlightenment and content for that book. Dear Dick, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake.
Can you talk a little bit about Kesey wrote that book, Sometimes a Great Notion. And there was this sort of frontier mentality of Oregon and the Pacific Northwest. And I just wonder if you could sort of, when you first, I don't know if you grew up there or not, but when you first got acclimated and really started to marinate in Southern Oregon, if you could describe the vibe and the environment and the multi-sensory components of that area.
Well, I was born in Bend, Oregon, and lived in Tumalo on a ranch for a few years, but I eventually moved to Portland and then to Salem and then to Turner, and then I went to Oregon State 3 years. Then I went to Nam for 3 tours and came back and went to the University of Oregon. So I was working in the insurance business when I first met most of the pranksters, or any of them.
You said you served 3 tours in Vietnam?
Yeah.
Did
well,
you?
They were on shipboard, so it's different than most. It wasn't 13 months on land. It was more like 13 months on sea, but it was separated into 3 separate ship cruises.
I assume you did not cross paths with Mr. Ken Babbs at that time. Or...
Oh no, he was back home and doing these other things by then.
So this is dear Dick. Of course he was. But the thing is that in my research, because I was born in 1978, and all the stuff that I love so much, and all the stuff that was cultivating, happened before I was born, and what was revelatory and has been continuing to inspire me is that, the Merry Pranksters themselves, Ken Kesey, Babbs, Walker, a lot of that started in Palo Alto and the San Francisco, La Honda area. But then when things started to get a little bit too I remember Babs telling me, like, as soon as everybody in the country in the Summer of Love started to come to San Francisco, that's when the pranksters went underneath the concrete and to get out, and they went to Eugene. And so I am curious about the first time you met Ken Kesey and the Pranks. How did that actually happen?
Well, it was a little accidental, all right, because I had, like I said privately before to you, that I was raising a deer, and since I was an insurance executive, I wasn't exactly thrilled that the state police had come to my house a couple of times in the last few days to find out why I was raising a deer. And so I ran into a couple of my renters on I had a duplex, and the renters on one side were going to the University of Oregon for a Master of Fine Arts. And they had come out here from Ann Arbor, Michigan to meet Ken. And they wanted me to go out and ask Ken if he wanted to raise that deer because they had had one before and it had died. What I didn't know is it died on Mother's Day. And when I got there, Faye was the only one there except Marie. And Faye didn't want anything to do with another deer after the first one had died on Mother's Day. Mm-hmm. And that's understandable to this day. We've finally become friends. But
well, I mean, at the time, there was some. You were not happy with her decision.
Well, no, I just went out to find out if they wanted to or not.
Right.
It didn't. It was just a. It was more that my friends wanted to have an excuse to go see Ken.
So I just want to be clear. You had renters that were obsessed with, that wanted to meet Kesey, and then you were nursing this deer back to health after you discovered it on the road, and you, how did you know that the Keseys had once tried to
Well, they knew. I don't know how.
These renters knew.
Yeah, my friends that were renters.
Interesting.
So when we went out, then Marie came out to the car and she said that she had a friend who might be able and willing to do it, and so she gave me Mike Hagan's number. And we didn't live very far apart. I was in South Eugene, 358 West 22nd in Eugene at the time. Mm. And so I called Mike, and several people were there. And he was talking a little bit like coming over Saturday or Sunday. I don't remember what day it was. But I said, well, could you come tonight? Because I'm going to have some official visitors again tomorrow.
Right. So, I mean, those cops were coming, the police were coming every day.
Yeah, what had happened was when I took Goldberry out to a park about 2 blocks away and walked her around the park to get exercise out of the house. But I had to do that early because I was an insurance executive and I was supposed to be at the office pretty early.
Sure.
So I took her out for 6 o'clock in the morning, and about the third morning, one of the neighbor girls saw me. And from then on, it became kind of a contest, but pretty soon I had 4 little neighbor girls getting up at 6 o'clock and following me.
Oh, that is so sweet.
And, well, it was sweet, except that it was dangerous.
Yeah, but it's just like, I
wasn't trying to attract attention.
No, but I mean, but you realize all the unintended consequences of doing what you were doing. So, I mean, in some ways, it's like, at least hearing it sounds beautiful, but I'm sure at the time it was like just one more.
Well, no, I was amused, but I was trying to figure out what else to do. So I got up and took her out at 5, and that lasted for one day. And the next day, the girl across the street spied on me, and she was out there at 5. And then the day after that, all 4 of them were again. So I said, look, this can't go on, so I'll just take her at 6 o'clock and don't worry about it. And we all walked around the park at 6 o'clock with my deer, which by that time was about 3-4 weeks old. And so I was. I'm pretty sure somebody in the neighborhood had noticed because the state police were knocking on the door pretty regularly
every day. And so you had already. I just want to be clear. Like it was attracting a decent amount of attention, and then you had reached out to Faye. But they had a traumatic incident with a deer, so they said no. So then you called you got Hagan's number. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I called a couple of other guys, but they all came together, and it wound up Mike and Karen took it back over to Mike's place, and we finished raising it over there. A little while later, when they went to Woodstock, I had to leave work 4 times a day to go feed her. That was a good thing that I could do that. But
Interesting. Okay, so that now we have the time. So it's 69. This is 69.
yeah.
Wow. So,
And so
go ahead.
from there, I just got to know him more and more, because as I was hanging out, I'd go up to help him feed Goldberry and things like that. I just hung with her. But then I met more and more of them as the summer went on, as far as the other pranksters went.
I'm curious because that's fascinating. One of the interesting things is that Kesey Babs told me that he was sulking in his closet and regretted in the aftermath not going to Woodstock. But when they all left for Woodstock, did you meet Kesey then?
No, I'd met him before that quite a bit. I just was in charge of 3 insurance offices with 7 salesmen and 3 secretaries in my office alone, so I wasn't going anywhere.
Right.
But that's why I could leave 4 times a day and go feed Goldberry.
This deer, man, is incredible. So, ultimately, you had met Kesey in passing, but you didn't. The first time you became sort of intimately involved with the pranksters was with Goldberry at Hagen's place.
Yeah, I didn't meet him. I didn't meet Kesey until after that, but it was very shortly after that, within 2 or 3 weeks at the most. They were doing they had a place down on 10th and Jefferson, I think, was called the Film House, and they were all working very hard on making variations of the movie of the bus trip and things like that.
Absolutely.
So
This is
I was hanging out
fantastic.
there.
Oh, my God. So can you, just for the audience listening around the world, we're talking to just a classic individual here. What was in your mind, aside from the deer, how did those guys work in a way? How did they work as a team, and why did you gravitate to them, and why would people like your neighbors gravitate to people like that?
Well, in the spring, my neighbors had turned me on to that wonderful liquid LSD.
Yes.
And so they had quite an abundance of it. And
This is the
I didn't
spring.
mind running into them.
So the spring prior to Woodstock, you were ingesting liquid acid. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then
For a guy fresh, well, at that point I was back from Nam for about a year. I'd gotten married and divorced already, and bought a house for myself and a duplex to rent out, and it was my renters in the duplex that turned me on to the first pot and then LSD in quick succession. So that spring was eventful, and then it was July 3rd when I found the deer, so all this was shortly after July 3rd of 69.
This is so.
But by 72, I knew them well enough that I was in charge of security at the Dead Show at Elmira, the country fair.
Oh my gosh, that is. Oh wait. Let's just stop right there. Fundamentally, just from your own personal experience, how did this was especially when the film house was rocking, and the pranksters had their hands on, I guess, Owsley's acid at the time. How did it shake you out of, if any, rigid thought patterns you had? How did it change you? How did you become psychedelicized at that time?
Well, it was fairly simple. They said, "Here, we've got something unique," and I said, "What's that?" And they said, "It's a psychedelic." I said, "Okay." So I sat on a swing in a backyard under a grape arbor for about 12 hours and visited people in India and other places. Psychic, whether it was or not, I was easy to convince because I was basically Oregon farm boy with with nothing but real kind of hick background.
Well, it's really interesting you bring that up because that word has a derogatory, the word hick, but I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, and also delighted. I mean, Chuck Kesey, they came from Arkansas. They came from Arkansas. And it was, they weren't pretentious people by any means.
No.
There was no, they were people of the earth and
they lived in Springfield when Chuck and Ken were kids, and went to, I think when they went to high school, Chuck went to the University of Oregon. Ken went to the University of Oregon, and he was on the wrestling team and an excellent wrestler. And Chuck went to Oregon State a year or two later and majored in dairy husbandry, which is their father was in charge of a large dairy and creamery association co-op, and Chuck majored in I got awards for making ice cream when he was at Oregon State. So, and he's the one that started introducing probiotics into dairy products, which is where I got the acidophilus to save Goldberry's life a couple times. I went over to the creamery in Marie, and Nancy would give me acidophilus and bifidus, and I would mix that in the milk that I gave to Goldberry, which is what saved her, basically.
So just tracing the lineage back here, Chuck and Ken's father started the creamery, or was that Chuck's doing?
I think I'm not really sure. I know Chuck and Sue really well, but I'm not really sure. All that I know is their father was in charge of a dairy co-op situation. They'd already been doing the creamery operation, and they had the health food and pool store next door to it, which was a part of the building.
Right. And then sort of after his schooling, Chuck sort of took it to a new level. Or when were you?
I think.
Or was Nancy's?
I think Chuck and Sue did it themselves, but I'm not certain of any of that.
But I guess when
I met them shortly after that it all happened, and I never did inquire.
Sure. No, well, Nancy's yogurt. When did that hit the market? That today has stood the test of time.
They were making it when I met them in '69.
Wow, and including antibodies in it.
Yeah, with the
probiotics.
With the
probiotics.
And I believe they had the bifidus at the time. That's probiotics. Is what the general classification now. Yeah, I'll go get a quart of their current yogurt and tell you.
Yeah.
It's out on the back porch. So I get.
Is there?
But specifically, they have a number on it now of how many of these microorganisms or whatever is in it, which this is Nancy's probiotic whole milk yogurt, 41 billion live probiotics in any serving, 41 billion. So they're not very big. But they're real good for you.
Well, and for the deer, it's really again remarkable. So you're hanging out at the film house. The acid tests were pretty well before you connected with them. But could you paint the social scene of like what that looked like? Were people just? Was it indoors? Was it?
It was a pretty close thing. The very first. In fact, film house was the very first time I did meet Ken. And everybody was getting in his Cadillac, and Paige and Hagen wanted me to come along. I knew them better than most of the rest. And as Paige was holding the door for me to get in, Ken turned around to me from the driver's seat and said, "Do my car," and went back to my apartment because I had the dope on me that they were planning on smoking.
Hold on a second. The Skype dropped there. He said, "Do I know you?" What did he say to you?
He said, "Do you mind? I want to spend some time with my friends." And none of them had made me a formal introduction.
Oh my God, that's hysterical. So who stepped?
In later
Hagen?
years, I
Yeah.
stayed at his house and took care of his kids while they went to school, and he was on teaching fellowships in like Ohio or someplace back in the Midwest, Indiana. I'm not sure what state that particularly time was, but for about a month I was watching his house that time, and it, our relationship got a little better after that, but.
He was sort of
that was my introduction.
Right. So I mean, that was the introduction. He said, "Do you mind? I'd like to spend some time with my friends." And then they were like, "Well, actually, he's Deer Dick is a good friend because they wanted to come back and smoke the grass you had."
Well, I just went home with it. I wasn't driving over to Mike's after he said that. I went over there a lot later, but I didn't go over there that day.
What was it like? That's the most amazing thing about it, because was there a defining moment for you?
No, we just rubbed elbows enough that finally he accepted that I was okay after all. I wasn't just there to be starstruck and, oh my goodness, oh wow. And in fact, I knew less than most of my friends about him.
Right, he loved that. So he just knew you were being yourself. I guess that's part of the lore, and also I think that gets lost. Were there a lot of groupies? Did he have to fend off a lot of people? And were there a lot?
Yeah, they had people coming out to the ranch all the time. I mean,
Jesus.
It was one thing that they just probably didn't like so much. But they'd have a lot of people. And I drove out to see him one time, and my transmission went out on my car, and he let me move into the bunkhouse where he was, not bunkhouse, but it was a big long, like probably it was a chicken coop at one time, but it was a large farm building. And they had a wood stove in there, and he did a lot of his writing in there. So I was living there with my girlfriend at the time for quite a while.
What?
And
yeah. What?
I worked for him for I put up a fence around the front yard, and eventually made enough money to buy a transmission. I had a couple of friends come out, and we pulled my transmission out and put the new one in, the used one. And then my girlfriend and I went back to tree planting, which we'd been doing before the car broke down.
In Springfield on the farm, or
on the farm?
Yeah, on the farm. You were planting trees on the farm. Holy
that particular time, I went out to the farm and the car broke down when I was there. So I asked him if there was any way I could make $300 and buy myself a transmission, and he paid me for putting the fence up.
Can you talk a little bit about a guy who is in my soul right now? Is Jed Kesey? Did you know Jed?
I knew Jed well.
Can you talk about him? Because when I interviewed Zane,
it'd be hard for Zane.
Well, no, Zane was very beautiful in the sense that he looked at Jed. Everybody kind of idolized Jed, and it was a blow. At least Zane did, and I think that I'm talking about when he tragically passed. But can you talk a little bit about Jed Kesey? He was the oldest. And by the way, Marie was she the adopted kid? Who was Marie?
No, Marie was her own person. She was Black Maria in the book, but anyway, she was on the bus to start.
What was her full name?
I forget. Marie Black, I believe. I'm not sure.
Okay, so she was her own person. Jed.
My basic deal in Litany of Friendly Heroes, which is a poem I wrote in July 15th, 1989 in Boron, California, while I was serving 5 years in federal prison for 5.4 pounds of marijuana. I wrote, Bobby Sky Steinbecker stayed high, lived free. Jed Kesey across the river, Riding Point. Lou Milson knew the U. John Page, all of you. Cindy Hendricks, truth sayer, loving star. Sonny Agrilite Becker, his lights shine bright. Fletcher, move farm fist, star cosmic teacher. Uncle John Williams, unconquered hero. And the list goes on and on and on.
What's the...
Now it's June 28th, 2012. So I knew Judd pretty well. We wrestled a few times. I wrestled at Oregon State, once 168 at the time, and one time we were upstairs in the barn, and Ken had a wrestling mat for the boys to practice on, and I was showing them some Oregon State moves because Ken has gone to Oregon. He was the champion wrestler when he went there.
There are different moves and different...
But we had different moves.
I did, yeah.
And one of Ken's best moves was he came over to see me because he was sitting at his typewriter writing, and he came over to see me and he said, "Do you have any inspiration for me?" And I said, "I've got some in the car. I didn't bring it in." He says, "Well, could you go get it?" And I said, "Oh, sure." So I went and got him some speed and came back and gave it to him, and he ate it. And he was over there typing for about an hour, half an hour, 45 minutes, something. And meanwhile, I'm working out with Jed and Zane, and we're just doing, here, try this and try this move.
Right.
And here's another move. And Ken says, let's wrestle a little bit. I said, "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea." He says, "Oh, no, it'll be okay." So the one thing that the University of Oregon wrestlers did was what we call a leg drag or an ankle grab when you're trying to sit out, when you're down. So I'm down, and I try to sit out, and he grabs my ankle, and he's so strong that it sprained my ankle. And that really killed my enthusiasm for wrestling with him anymore. We got through about 10 minutes before that happened, but once that happened, I said, "No, that was the dumbest thing I've ever done." He said, "What's that?" "Give you speed just before I go wrestle you." I said it might have been closer to even if I hadn't have done that.
Oh my God! He didn't even know what he really injured you bad.
No, he was just that strong. It wasn't. It was absolute instinct.
Right.
For any Oregon wrestler to grab your ankle and yank you out for the moon. And I just forgot that. I tried to. I didn't sit out fast enough.
So he came off the typewriter and was like, I'm ready to get in the, get on the mat." And you're like,
"Well, I need to get some exercise now." And I said, "Yeah, I'll bet." So we wrestled for about 10 minutes.
Holy God.
And then kabam.
Oh.
And after that, I kind of went over and just sat down for quite a while. Probably smoked a couple joints.
So, what was going on with, did you eventually, how long did you stay in the insurance business?
Well, not long after I started taking psychedelics.
So, at that point, though, I think if I remember correctly at the party, you were an alchemist, or is that fair to say? You were.
Well, that was kind of came along later, but not very much later, because I met Bob Richards pretty early on, thanks to Paige and a couple of the guys.
I'm sorry, who is this cat? I don't know who that cat
Bob
is.
was the mad chemist.
And Eugene.
Yeah, he lived in Eugene, and
wow.
he was
wow.
research chemist for the United States Army Research Department in Bethesda, Maryland, as a unvolunteer scientist, basically.
Oh my God.
And but anyway, he was the mad chemist that was making things for the Prankster family and the Honda, and then Bear came along and pretty much took that role over, and Bob retired back to Eugene. But we ran a small side business because I knew a lot of the people that were making things, and he knew how they should be making them to have the highest level of effectiveness, basically purity.
That's right,
so
absolutely.
We made a good team.
Okay, I just want to be clear. Richards...
I would go locate bad batches and bring some sample to him, and he'd tell them how to make it. It's ironic.
I mean, you're blowing my mind right now. Richards was in Bethesda.
In the early 60s.
Okay, in the early so I mean, we're talking about he was a catalyst for the acid test and things like that, and then
Well, I'm not sure about the catalyst. He was just such.
That's
a
the
fine
wrong word
chemist
for it.
that
Yeah,
he had no problem making whatever he decided to make. Let's say that.
of course, and that's perfect.
And that was a skill that I found useful.
I'm trying to. So I mean, but when you got.
I didn't when he first met them and down in La Honda, I didn't know any of them. That was years before my time.
Okay, so he was.
Probably
That's right.
Some of that was going on.
That's right. Okay, so he connected with. He was making stuff for the Kesey family when they were living in La Honda, and then so he had retired at a certain point to Eugene, and at that point, Owsley was already cranking on the acid, and Bob would come in and purify it. Is that right, or
Well, not necessarily acid. We specialized in other areas. We had our own. By that time, there were enough people making good acid that we had access to that we didn't. We were more working in other areas.
What areas were those?
Well, there's a lot of psychedelics. I mean, I had friends that were growing peyote, and I had friends that were growing coca plants.
Sure.
And then as far as methamphetamine hydrochloride, there's several ways of making it, and nothing I've seen in the last 20 years is any of it. It's all bullshit.
It is bullshit. You're darn right. You know, I mean, not like I have any real experience in that stuff, but I mean, this is blowing my mind. So okay, you go to the film house. Kesey said, I want to hang with my friends. Eventually he brought, he's like, you're one of them. He recognized your authenticity. And then once you got in, you guys already had distribution chains with LSD. But can you talk about like the process of coca or peyote and how you and Richards would work? Because I mean, I have this vision of LSD that's a laboratory drug. I mean, like you can sort of work through that in the labs, but the other stuff
you can fake it, but it ain't going to be it.
So how? I mean, I'm not asking for the how did you work? I mean,
well, at a certain level of expertise, and I've noticed this with 3 or 4 friends that had that level. First of all, to get to that level, you have to be trained in using any lab equipment in the room that there is. Bob Richards was that way, and a couple of other folks that are in legal businesses. I don't want to name her that way that I know.
Mm-hmm.
But what it amounts to is, at one time when I got arrested, it was for having the most sophisticated clandestine lab they'd seen. And
are you
another
kidding me?
time
This
I got
is
arrested
unbelievable.
for having the smallest clandestine lab they'd ever seen.
Oh my, dude, dear Dick, you are blowing my mind right now. This is unreal. Were you? Yeah.
I got to serve a little time, a couple of those times.
But I guess I'm trying to get to this idea of, I mean, prior to, were you? When did you start to collaborate with Richards?
Right after I met him, we had mutual interest.
Oh, you have a year on that at all, or?
I don't remember what year it was. It was probably 72 or so.
Right.
Because I took a little hiatus when 69 to 71, Fletcher Fist and a couple ladies and I started a little commune down in Yoncalla called Moo Farm. And we stayed on the property for a couple years. We had the largest grade A goat dairy in the history of Oregon at the time.
And you...
and then right after that, I moved back to Eugene, and then right after that, I started hanging with Bob Richards quite a bit.
Hanging with Richards, and it was evident that Hagen and Page, Babs, and those cats were interested they were looking for the full the full menu of psychedelics.
Yeah, there's a wide range, and there were people making psilocybin. There were people making various things, and basically none of the people you mentioned were any of that. But I knew people who were, and that's what led to the basic business that Bob and I wound up having together, which was kind of funny.
Well, I want to know about this clandestine. No, this is unbelievable. It's unreal. It's
a chemist.
Yeah, but you're a stone genius, is what it is. I mean, the bottom line is that when did you first have the dream about the clandestine operation? Did that come to you in a vision? I mean, how did that happen?
No, it just came to me of necessity. I ran into some people that were doing something dumb, and I knew it was dumb, but I didn't know what in particular was causing it. So I took some to Bob, and he said, well, this is what's causing it. Hell. And I said, oh, good. So I went back to him, and I said, this is what's causing it. And they cleaned it up, and it was all fine.
Dude, this is so important, man. I mean, this is so crazy.
If you want to have something straightened out, feed your dick. And so we straightened it out for him.
I took so much
was
dirty.
His genius and my footwork.
So I'm sure a cat that you came across was Roy Seaburn, and Roy talked about when he was on Perry Lane with Kesey, really the birth of the whole thing started with peyote, and Kesey liked to. I've never actually done it, but a lot of people, you purge yourself. One of the first things you do is throw up, and then sort of the trip takes over. And Kesey used to like to bake it or boil it or find ways of extracting it so you'd have the best kind of experience from it.
Yeah, if you made tea with it, it was the gentlest usually.
So, I mean, one
time when I was arrested for having the most sophisticated clandestine lab up in Blue River, I had 10,000 fresh peyote buttons in wire cages under my bed. And that thrilled them, but they didn't list it.
My God. I don't, but I mean, is there a way that you can talk about when you and Richard started to collaborate, how the Pranksters, I mean, that was just, if they were like, Dear Dick.
They weren't connected to that hardly at all. There's very few of them that knew we were doing it. Very, very few.
I mean, Kesey was probably aware, though.
Oh, no. I'm not sure. We never discussed it.
So he didn't come up, after a while, though, I mean, Owsley, there was plenty.
He stayed south. He'd come up and visit, some of his real close friends. But I would meet him occasionally, but I wasn't ever in the inner Owsley group as far as that goes. I knew him by Bear, and he had a more up-to-date nickname by then.
So, I mean, but
Augustus Kingsley Owsley III is deceased, and I hope he had a wonderful life in Australia.
The dude was accessing the Matrix as you were at all times. Was it fair to say that, I mean, even when you got connected to the Pranksters, even though LSD was federally illegal at that point, that it was still pretty copacetic? I mean, were people getting busted for acid, or was it still? I mean, marijuana's always been illegal, but acid was legal for a while, and then there was this period where it wasn't, and it has continued to be. But the early '70s, I can't imagine it being severely enforced. But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, it was quite severely enforced. They would rather have me with 10 hits of acid than 10 pounds of methamphetamine.
That they could put you away for longer.
Class A felony instead of a Class B. They did that up on Mount Hood. I got out of state penitentiary because I had completed my 7-year term, and I had that overturned in the Supreme Court 6 months later. But that's kind of a funny side story. Not so funny, but it wasn't. Didn't seem reasonable. And he said, "I don't think so either. I hereby revoke that $1 million cash bail and refuse to set bail in this case any further."
At the state Supreme Court made that ruling?
No, the circuit court judge in Eugene. So he gave me the full 7-year sentence to go do, and I went and did it. But at the time, the state was so overcrowded, I only had to do a short while because my matrix was like 0 to 6 months. All it was a probation violation, and that got overturned.
Wow.
Because I didn't violate it. But when I got out, the feds brought a snitch over to see me, who gave me 100 hits of LSD, and then I took it home to where I was living at the time, and about 2 weeks later, he came with the top federal agent for the DEA for the Pacific Northwest, and they said they wanted to take their dates to see a new movie, Star Trek. I said, okay. He says, yeah, could I get some of that acid back from you? Do you still have it? And I said, yeah, I got it. I had it buried out in back of my chicken coop, so I went out and got it. I gave him 5 hits of it, and they charged me with 20 years for it. And the guy sitting inside, waiting for it, said that I gave it directly to him. And his snitch is the one that gave it to me, and I give it back to the snitch. That's just one of the times they've lied in federal court.
So,
or state court.
Okay, so let's just get the timeline here. By 72, you were running. The creamery was in fiscal trouble. Is that right? And the Dead did a benefit concert at Veneta in 72.
Yeah, they hadn't kept up with the payroll taxes, so they had a bill for something around $13,000, and Grandma Kesey put the money up for them so that that didn't get any further, but they couldn't pay her back, so the Dead came up and did a benefit at the Country Fair site, which at the time was the Renaissance Fair.
I mean, and you were tasked with security.
Yeah, Dick Jones was the producer, and I was his assistant basically. But my primary job was security, but I also did tickets for Southwest Oregon. So I drove from Eugene to Coos Bay, and then over to Roseburg and down to Ashland and Medford and over to Klamath Falls and back to Eugene. I got back to Eugene about 2:30 in the morning the day of the show.
I'm just trying to figure out, why were you on the road?
I was collecting the money from the tickets I'd sold.
And you had to do it back then. That's the way you had to do it back then.
Yeah, and the tickets were $3.50 a piece.
So people that wanted to purchase, were there people that came from far and wide, or was it mainly a regional concert?
They came from far and wide, I think. I mean, there were something like 30,000 of them. I don't know where they all came from. People just walked away from the ticket booths at about 2:00 and came back to watch the show.
If I remember,
don't know how many people were there.
We can. I mean, we're operating on a really high frequency here, but it's like, the truth is that I think it was 100 something. It was the hottest day of all time, or something in history. And running security, that could have posed some problems because, I mean, was there any crises that you had to deal with, or was?
Yeah, we had a major incident, but it's in the past, and I don't think that other people that are still around want to remember it.
Well, I mean, I guess the point is, without mentioning any names, I mean, at Grateful Dead shows in '84, you had people slitting their throats. Was there suicide?
Nothing like that. This was the friendliest, happiest-go-lucky psychedelic party that Lane County had ever had.
So what? I mean, but what happened though?
Somebody was trying to do something stupid, and we stopped them before they could quit.
Did you you did you I mean, did you at that point like couldn't you? I know you were running security at that show, but you know, did you know Mountain Girl? Did you know Sunshine? Did you get to know what's been revelatory to me about Jerry Garcia just was the idea that, yeah, I mean, the Dead were birthed out of San Francisco, but he had this whole family thing going on
Oh yeah,
up in Eugene.
I knew most of them right along, and the Mountain Girl and Sunshine both live here in town, and as far as I know, we're on speaking terms.
Sure. Well, I mean, but I mean, like, were you just like, at that time in '72, had you ever witnessed, I mean, were you somebody that was always digging live music, or was that like the most insane thing you've ever experienced in your life?
Oh, I had a little bit of a experience, but I'm essentially tone deaf. I had my left ear put out of circuit in about the first grade when a fellow hit it with a softball from long range. And so I have a different slant on it. I appreciated the rhythm, but I could never pick out, like Babs would say, the artistry of winding it through. I wouldn't say, okay, this time they did this and this time they did that. I would just be able to say, I really enjoyed when they did this, and I really enjoyed when they did that.
I totally understand what you're saying. You could feel the vibration of the drummers, but as far as Lesh weaving underneath, Garcia over the top, Weir in the, you couldn't really.
Well, the way that they would do it, you would feel it like running figure eights in the water, as Ken would put it.
Dude, I'm telling you, that's exactly what when I listen to the live shows, that's what when they're cooking, that's what it feels like. So I mean, in your mind, someone like Garcia was did a lot of cocaine. And he was always open to, I think peyote was actually a very big healing drug for the drummers, especially Billy Kreutzmann. But I'm just wondering if, like, you know, like you said, you had this operation with Richards, but were musicians or people like from the Dead, you know, once they got hip to the fact that you were really making the most pure, amazing stuff in the world, did you wind up?
I didn't do business with any of the Prankster family hardly. I would give dope to Page, and I would give dope to a couple of others, but outside of that, I don't remember ever charging Page for anything.
Page Browning we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, John Page Browning
John
and I
Page
were real
Browning,
tight friends. I was living his property when he died.
Wow.
I just paid $1,700 in bills for all of his electrical bills and everything, so that he could have power on and his services all restored. About three days later, a week later, he died.
What is it about? I guess it's really interesting. The one guy
he had an aneurysm in his stomach lining, I think it was. But he basically bled to death through his stomach.
Wow. What's interesting to me is the idea that, you know, I guess, do you feel like we live now? It's a twofold question. Why was it? Why have we gotten such contaminated, dirty psychedelics now, or methamphetamines, in your mind? And you know, is it that Richards was just so locked in as somebody who was so rooted in the chemistry part of it, and he understood all that? And why do we? And do we live in a more punitive society? I couldn't ask a better person, somebody who spent years in jail. Do you believe we're a more punitive society now, or were we actually more draconian back then?
I haven't had any federal officer lie about me in court. But in the last 25 years, I haven't been to court.
Right.
In the 25 years before that, it was a different story. Whenever I went to court, they lied.
And
so I can't tell you about recent history, but
well, I'm just saying with the private, there was no private, there wasn't a private prison company.
At one point in time, they were saying that I was doing so much and so much and so much, and the raw truth of it was that the only thing I had done in the last 6 months was what they had brought to me, and hired me basically to make, and so that gave me an idea of how much their various snitches throughout Oregon were producing for them a week or a month. I explained that to the judge, and he gave me probation instead of 20 years for giving them back their own 5 hits of acid.
You never had...
But they stood there on the court, at the court, in circuit court in Clackamas County, and said that I was making 10 pounds of methamphetamine hydrochloride a week at 5 different labs. I just told the judge if I was that rich, we wouldn't be here. We'd be at my country's estate discussing where you wanted yours. And if you didn't want one, and I'm not saying this to impugn your judgment, Your Honor, if you didn't want one, we would have a change of venue until I found a judge who did want one. There's no possibility that I'm making that kind of money. And he kind of agreed with me and gave me probation. 5 years bench probation, and never bothered me again.
What was the first year?
The charge was for furnishing 5 hits of LSD to a federal officer. I asked the judge also if there was anyone else in the courtroom he'd rather have me give it to. And he said, no, I can't really say there is, because it was the head agent of the DEA for the Pacific Northwest. Who else you want me to give it to, Your Honor? Joe wouldn't show up because he knew that he'd have to lie on court, saying I gave it to him.
The snitch?
No, the federal agent.
Right, because you didn't give it to him.
I didn't give it to him. He never saw me with it, and he gave it to the guy that gave it back to him. He doesn't even know if I gave the guy any when we went outside.
I get it. No, did you choose to self-represent, or did you have any legal...
I got a good rep. You'd betcha.
How did you find that lawyer?
Well, one of them was a close friend from Moo Farm, and the one that I hired was Wayne Allen, who became a circuit court judge himself for many, many years. And he just passed a little while ago, a year or two ago. But he was a very highly respected attorney, and my friend worked with him on the case and mostly did the appearances up there, and because it was all in Oregon City. And then when they came up with the sentencing, they both came. And Wayne Allen assisted with the rest of the case. But we had it down to that particular judge just didn't buy it. But several others did.
When would you, was Kesey coming to visit you in prison? Did he stay in touch with you?
Oh, we stayed in touch, and he wrote a couple of times. I wasn't always in prison waiting trial, but once or twice I was. But anyway, he wrote letters to the judges and things. I have a copy of a couple of them.
What would he say?
Oh, he'd say that I worked hard when we were doing an event, and he put in one of them when we did. We were planning for the hoo-ha, and was it 76
yep,
or 77?
Absolutely.
Somewhere in there.
Yep.
He said he'd come first and help set up the chairs, and he'd be the last one close the doors after he'd swept out, and things like that.
And then ultimately, there were periods of time when you would come out of, like when he would allow you to stay at the farm for periods of time. If
I did that 2 separate occasions.
so, what
And,
can you talk about those? Like, because I mean, he was actually on residency at colleges and things like that.
Well, no, just for the summer term, I think they had like one of those 8-week or 6-week or 8-week seminar things, writing seminar at a college back east, not east. Anything east of Idaho is back east.
I understand.
But
Yeah, more like the breadbasket, like Ohio or things like that. Yeah.
when they call Colorado out west, I have fond memories of being in Colorado, but it took me a long time to get there.
So, I mean, can you talk to people that maybe will listen to this 50 years from now after we're gone and paint the picture of what it was like? Like, obviously, when Ken was there, you already told that epic story about wrestling. You know, he was typing and you were there staying. But when he wasn't there, how would you describe that? And it's still there, but how would you describe that place? And did you get really close with Chuck during those times?
Oh, I was closer to Chuck most of the time. Just a second.
Yeah.
I open a beer. It's getting a little dry throat.
Oh, dude, I wish I had a beer. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, technically the difference is I'm not working, so.
No, this is not working. So, talk, I mean, because this is important. Please talk about this beautiful cat. I had a chance, Chuck Kesey. I mean, tell me the legacy of, and your friendship with this cat.
Well, Chuck was the kind of guy that would get out there and go do it. And you could either get lost in the shadows or keep up. And I chose to keep up because that was more fun.
Give an example.
Yeah, that's easy. we went up to Silverton to a creamery that was selling a 5,000-gallon tank, and I drove a 40-foot truck up because it was 40 feet long or so.
Yeah.
And when we got there, we had no way the guy didn't have a forklift or anything. We had no way of picking the thing up, just 3 of us. And so Chuck and I had handyman jacks at each end of the tank and a lot of blocks. And we kept jacking it up one click at a time and back and forth to keep from having it tip one way or the other.
Right.
And Benny was basically our worrier. I mean, he worried whether it was tipping one way or the other way, and he also worried whether it was going to pull him with it if he tried to stop it.
Absolutely.
So, and he was fully within his rights. It would have been a questionable shot. But anyway, we tilted the thing up until we got it up to the level of the bed, a little bit above, of course. And then I backed the truck up with the tailgate under one end of it, and we put pipes down. And we put it on a pipe and roll it forward, and I'd back the truck up more and put another pipe in and roll it forward, and I'd back it up a little.
Oh, my God. Wait a minute.
So we loaded that,
How
and
much did that thing weigh? How much did it weigh?
Oh, I don't know. It's 40 feet long, 5,000-gallon triple stainless steel tank. What's that weigh?
Oh,
6 or 7 pounds.
my God.
And so we got that down to the creamery, and it turned out that there was no place it would go in, the doors.
Oh, God.
And
Jesus.
so we took a block wall down, and he had to move a large tank. I'm not familiar with that size of tanks. I would say it was somewhere between 1,000 and 2,500 gallon milk tank that was behind the block wall that he had to move before he brought that in. And then we brought it in and set it down on the floor and put the tank back, and he had the wall put back and all. But that was what I would describe as an adventure, and Benny and Chuck and I all survived it. But it was, I was thrilled doing, but it was always a challenge.
Was Chuck a prankster?
They all were.
Oh, God.
I mean, if you talk to George Walker, you'll get the official list from that.
Well, but I mean, an original, I care about the original cats because a lot of people came on, here and there, nilly-willy.
I'm an also ran that has enjoyed the ride.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you are dear. I mean, dude, you are just part of the amalgamation. But, can you talk about the respect and relationship that Chuck and Ken had together?
That was there was no. I never saw a bitter moment between them. That was always getting together to enjoy life, which is what we should all try to do at any level we can.
I completely agree, man. It's about happiness. Were you a free man in the free world when Jed passed? I mean, do you remember that whole situation?
Oh yeah. Basically, the deal was that Jed was on a University of Oregon wrestling trip going to Washington State.
Right.
My mother graduated from Washington State. I'd spent a lot of time in Pullman. And when we moved there, I was 8 years old, and we went from Tumalo to Pullman, and we took that same road. And the guy driving was used to driving in Tumalo. He's one of our neighbors. And he was very, very good on ice and snow. And he slid out 2 or 3 times going up there, and if it hadn't been for going so slow, he would have wrecked also. And he was really good on ice and snow. So the point of that is that they slid over the side and tumbled. And Jed Kesey and Mr. West were killed, I believe it was.
Ken was telling them before they left the tires were getting bald and they were not safe to drive, and it went anyway. I mean, some people say that was a demarcation point, that Ken did have a renaissance after that, but he never fully recovered. Part of him was lost after Jed left this planet.
Well, Jed was the kind of a that's why I said Jed Kesey across the river riding point. I mean, I had a lot of friends in Nam riding point, and so that was the level of tribute that I made to him.
What does that mean, though? I'm sorry, I just don't understand what that.
In the LRPS long range patrol, you have one guy that goes out ahead of everybody else, and he used to draw the fire from the sniper.
Oh man! And what was it called? On point?
Riding. It was called the point man.
Point man. So tell me again the line about Jed. What was it? What was the line you had about him?
It stayed high. No, it was across the river, riding point. River being died, and riding point being he's leading the way.
River. I'm sorry. What does river mean?
That he had died. He's across the life river.
The life river, man. That is so heavy. Jesus. Can you? Oh my God, Bear. Deer Dick. You just have blown my mind wide open today. I just. In your mind, what is? Well, I mean, can you tell me a great Ken Babbs story?
I have to be careful because he knows better ones about me.
Well, I don't. The tables are always getting turned, but I mean, I just really because there were cats that younger cats who would show up and at these bars, and Babs would be dancing with like 3 women doing the alligator, and I mean the guy was so out, he was way out, man, and I mean I'm looking to I mean something that brings a smile to your face that he would chuckle about without it being too revealing. I mean I'm always looking for new, like Mason Williams talked about going up to Kesey's house, and there was a parrot at the house eating bark off the roof of the place. And,
Rubiaco, yeah.
And is that the name of that was the name of the parrot?
I think lice or whatever it is finally got to him, but.
Yeah, so I mean, was there a film house? Do you remember your first time seeing Babs or what?
There's a little humor to that part because in God, what was that? At one point in there, Ken was putting on it was 86 hoo-ha, I think it was, and he wanted Mason Williams to play. And Mason and I were good friends, so I went and talked to Mason about seeing Ken, and they became lifelong friends to where when Ken died, Mason was one of the people delivering the eulogy. And a short talk after at his memorial service.
Yeah, well, Mason, first of all, lives right. I mean, he's still near you. He's still doing his thing.
Yeah, up to McKenzie, I hope.
No, I mean, I went to his house in downtown Eugene. I mean, so I mean,
he moved in town, eh?
He did.
He must be a little older than I am then. I'm not going to town yet.
No, but I mean, like he said to me, Mason said Kesey used to say to him, it's easy for most people to be clever, but what's really special is if you can be magical. And younger cats who were fans of Kesey's, became friends with Ken. I mean, they would talk about him being able to hypnotize people. He would be able to take a room over, his storytelling capacity, magic.
Well, yeah, that's that quality his brother had just moving through space. Was you either keep up or you get left behind.
Well, no. So let's. This is so important. Moving through space. That was
in terms of literary.
Yeah.
You could spend a long time finding somebody that could spin a tale, and whether it was something that he was memorizing, something that he was making up, or something that had happened to him that he remembered that well, you couldn't tell the difference in the way he would do it.
Magic.
And that's what was magical about him, to me. I mean,
Do you remember? I mean, because there were guys that remember seeing him at parties, and the whole room would just be enraptured with it. Not even like a live event. It just he'd just start getting up and riffing, and he'd have everybody transfixed. I mean, was there anything like that stands out to you, at least? That sort of moving through space. I know that was Chuck's gift, but as far as a wordsmith, does anything come to mind?
There's times in psychedelics where the continuity is extremely smooth and everything's just all blending together, and that's basically how my 75-year-old memory is.
Well, you're doing a pretty darn good job, man. I mean, looking, is Richard still with us, or is he still?
No, he passed several years ago. His liver blew up. He experimented with a lot more drugs than he straightened out.
So you're saying he wound up eating a lot of dirty drugs too.
Well, not dirty. He made everything he ate.
Right. But what do you mean by that?
At one time when I was asked by a probation officer who was trying to figure out what he should do with me, what drugs I'd taken. This is 1971, I believe. It might have been before that, maybe 72. But long in there, he asked me, and I said, well, you want it alphabetically or numerically? And he said, whichever's easiest. And I said, well, I think numerically would be easiest. And I named 33 separate drugs. I couldn't name 5 of them now, but he was kind of flummoxed. He didn't have a real good answer of what to do next.
Did you eat acid in Vietnam?
Oh, no. No, I was on no psychedelics. I was lucky that I had an aunt who recently passed, but she understood the military, and she sent me rum cakes regularly.
I see. Very smart. Walker and Babs, I didn't expect to get caught up in this, as we all have, in this invisible virus.
Yeah.
And I've been trying to get this book. It's on the precipice of coming out, but I just feel like it's not a great time at this present moment.
Yeah.
And I feel an immediacy to it because people like Wavy, Gravy, and Babs and Walker, I mean, they stand the test of time like you, but I also know that life is short and fleeting, and I just wonder.
Yeah, the impermanence is getting ready to grab a lot of us. While I'm on the thought, let me interrupt you
go
with
ahead.
this one of George. When Ken wanted to put in the room in the barn to store all of his paperwork and everything, he hired George Walker. And George hired a friend of mine, Dave Barton. And there were several aspects to it. And there was one of them that neither George or Dave, although highly capable of it, wanted to do. So I came in as the third person doing it. And we put in a block wall with steel rebar going down through the blocks into the concrete down below and over the top of the thing in both directions in it'd be 8-inch squares, because they were 16-inch blocks, and you have a center of each block 8 inches apart. So I did all the rebar when we built that and helped do the mudding when we brought in the truckload of cement to cement the block walls in. George Walker was in charge of it. He figured out what we needed. He got it. He ordered it. He bought it. And he got the cement ordered when we were ready for it. And Dave Barton was the only other person involved, and he was stacking the blocks and helping me put the rebar down through it. And I was drilling the holes in the cement in the floor of the barn to put the end of the rebar into. So then we poured the cement down the top of the blocks all the way down to the bottom, and there was rebar all the way through it. Anyway, that's my George Walker story.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's a blue-collar pedestrian story, really. I mean, this is like, I mean, did Kesey, I mean, that sounds like another paid gig. Ken was very generous with his money and helped people. He put money in people's pockets when they needed it.
Yeah.
Not for free. Not for free. I mean,
what I liked was when the University of Oregon archivists went out there and got all that material out of that building. Their main thing, it didn't even have air conditioning. It didn't have what was it, neutralized air or whatever, and temperature control. And he said, when we got there, it was a concrete floor, kids.
Yeah, right. There would have been no preservation at that point. You guys saved that stuff, you know?
There was no, I mean, it was more for theft than it was for preservation. I mean, the security was to the point where they couldn't all be gone. And I've experienced that in other properties, so I was quite happy to be able to help out with it.
Just before we,
I,
yeah, go. I mean, before we wrap up here with Dear Dick. I mean, it's just you absolutely made my day. What is the significance of, in your mind, how did the Merry Pranksters change your life?
oh, the friendship aspect of it was always more important than the drug aspect of it, because most of us were intelligent enough and agile enough to be able to find them if we needed them. But to get together with that many people at once anywhere else.
Can you just, I'm sorry, the Skype dropped out there. You said you would have been able to be resourceful enough to find the drugs, but what about friendship?
But, well, the friendship of still, like, to this day, like why you met me at the Creamery party,
Right.
we're still all close friends, and
Yeah.
and the list that I made of the litany of friendly heroes, the first 6 or 7 were all people that were close to the Kesey family, the Prankster family, the Eugene family, whatever we call ourselves, or, you know, each other, as the case may be. It's still part of the same group of people. And when Bobby Peterson died, for example, he lived in my bedroom. When Paige died, I was living at his house.
Jesus, Bobby Peterson was Bobby Peterson. Are you kidding me?
No.
When did you meet Peterson?
He was a close friend.
But I mean,
He was living in my, I call it the Bobby Peterson Memorial Bedroom.
Oh, that's beautiful. My God,
It
that's
looked out
great.
over the creek, and the other way it looked out over the Row River.
Peterson was a beat poet or a prankster?
Well, he was a dead lyricist.
I know he was. I
He
can't
was
believe
the
you
one
dropped
that
that name.
wrote with Phil Lesh. I mean, I've got a thing of his original poems from. I don't have that with me right at the moment, but I just was looking in through it earlier. He wrote when he was at John Ford's place down in Mexico, on John Ford's type. John Houston. My wife corrects me.
I know
never
she's doing a
remember
great.
things.
By the way, how did you meet your wonderful wife? I mean, you went through a few girlfriends, but I mean, how did you meet her?
Oh, she was at a party here at this house in 1980, a New Year's party that I was invited to, and she lived with the fellow that was living here at the time that owned the place for 5 years, and they broke up, and I was living with my wife at the time, and we broke up after I got out of federal prison. And my wife, this one, as she says, I'm number 4, so you know, I had a lot of practice.
Yeah, no, I like how you guys look at wife number 4, but I mean, bless you guys, man, so
She
much.
said I finally calmed down enough to be.
Is it John Ford or John Houston?
I think it's John Ford.
This is when Kesey faked the suicide. That's where they went in Mexico. Is that the place they went to?
The which?
Well, I mean, this is before
The
you.
place in Mexico.
Well, yeah, there was a period of time where Kesey was going to, you know, he took the hit for, this is before you met them, but in '67 he was on the lam, and then he faked his suicide and went to Mexico, and they just all hung out down there for a while, and I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I thought that they were in Mazatlan in '62, but I was probably wrong.
It was just one of those things where, like, I know that Sunshine and Casa Babs were both born in Mexico, and I'm just wondering if that was the property down there as well. I just can't believe you were. I mean, Bobby Peterson, man, that guy's the most mercurial cat in the world, man. It's unreal. I mean, but
we were,
the
we just, I mean, there's times when we would just spend time speaking to each other in rhyme and going off, as you might say,
Yeah.
lyrically.
So Chuck Kesey's was the avatar quality was moving through space and time in fluidity. There was no, and if you didn't keep up, he was gone. I mean, in theory, when you went to get that insane product in Silverton, if you hadn't kept up, Chuck would have found a way to get it on the truck himself.
I'm sure.
Jesus.
I don't know what he would have done. But
I know.
sure
That doesn't matter. He would have figured it out. Yeah.
Once I got there with the truck, I don't think he was leaving without it. Otherwise, I know he couldn't have talked me into trying to do that.
That is, I mean, one of the
we
most.
were balancing it on. I've balanced a lot of things in my life, but not many like that. Where.
Yeah, I think the
only other real adventure thing that I did with Chuck though was when we went up to Albany and bought a boiler, a gas boiler, and I asked him before we left how much it weighed because I only had a half-ton Chevy pickup and I had a real nice 2x6 tongue and groove bed and but it only holds a little bit. And he said, well, it's only 1,500 pounds. So we got it, and the guy picked it up with a forklift and set it on the bed, and all 4 feet went right through my 2x6s, and it was about 2,500 pounds. But we got it all tied down and anchored, and it was sitting on the springs. I had half-ton coil springs, and had to jack up each side and put 2x4s in between the coil springs in 2 or 3 places to get it up high enough to get it off the tires. And the first turn I made to go up across the bridge in Albany to come in from the Corvallis side, the sway bar broke because the tank just slid sideways to the metal side frame of the bed of the truck. And that blew out the right rear tire. So Marie and Chuck and I went down to the river and started hauling up big flat rocks. And I had a handyman jack, but this thing was pretty good size. And we started jacking it up and blocking it with these rocks. And we got a little ways, and another guy pulled up in front of me and backed up and opened his tool chest and came back with another handyman jack. And he knew what he was doing also, so that was helpful. And we started continuing to jack it up. When I got my spare on, it was a wider tire than what would fit now because the bed had slid over. So we had to put it back down on the rocks and go to the front wheel, jack it up, take that wheel off, and put the spare on it, which on the front wheel, the wide one didn't matter. And that was a more narrow tire, and so we put it on the back one. By that time, a stator had come up behind us and had his lights on so people would go around us because we were on a bridge and we were partway into the lane while we did all this. At the end, when I was getting the last tire on, Marie, Chuck, the stator, and the other guy were all in the truck to keep it from falling over on me while I put that tire on.
Oh, my God.
And then we bolted it down. The guy in front drove on to a welding shop that he knew, a machine shop guy, and he had him stay open, and the stator escorted us over to that and he put the truck up on a lift and moved the frame back, or the bed back over to where he could get a weld on the sway bar. And then the stator escorted us out of the county. I think it's Lynn County up there in Albany, but he escorted us to the county line. And he called ahead and told people that we'd be on our way, that watch out for us because we had to go real slow.
You know, it's just, I just wanted to say before I let you go, what you just described is analogous to the teamwork and trust that needs to go on now amongst people in collaboration with trying to do the right thing with this coronavirus. It's absolutely amazing what that story. Dear
Well,
Dick,
I hope we can all get together enough in terms of we want to survive to be able to cooperate with what.
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I mean, I think in this case, it's one of these things where, whatever. It's just what it sounds to me is like a huge amount of divine cooperation from different people, strangers, and other people. And I think in this time, as we're about to go into a very dark 2-week, 14-day period, it's important. That story just resonated in my heart. And dear Dick, we've got more to do. I mean, this was an exhaustive. This was 90 minutes of insanity. I will get you a copy of this later, and if possible, if you have the ability to send me a photo of that list of people, the litany of people you riffed on in that poem, I would love that, because there was a lot of names in there I didn't even know.
Yeah, the last half, Cindy Hendricks was a neighbor of ours who died of cancer, but her last 3 months were spent here at this house pretty much. It was the only other place she went. Sonny Agrelite Becker was a fellow that manufactured lights for people to grow indoors before anybody knew you could grow light indoors. And Fletcher Fist was my partner at Moo Farm, where we had 280 acres and 42 people at one time, and a grade A goat dairy for 2 years. And Uncle John Williams was my uncle, obviously, but he had gone into Japan to impersonate a German general at a secret meeting. They had captured the general and given him the uniform. He spoke many languages, but he became a prisoner of war when the plane was shot down before he landed, before he could parachute out and get where he was going. And he was in a railroad yard when we sulfur bombed it, and that caused the deterioration of his legs, which didn't ever do him any good. Anyway, that's the bottom of the list. The rest of them you'll recognize.
Yeah. Dear Dick, much love to you, man. I look forward, when this thing passes over, to come catch a hang and maybe take a nap in the Bobby Peterson bedroom or something. But it was really, thank you so much, and I will send you a copy of this interview. And I know some of these stories are going to be in this book. So much love.
I got 20 acres and 3 houses, so we can put you up in a tent at the very worst.
Oh, at the very worst, man. You're going to have to build that tent for me, though. You're a blue-collar cat. Yo, listen, be cool, man. Much love to you. We'll talk soon, all right?
Take it easy.
All right, dude. Later.
Bye-bye.
All right. One more in the books. We'll be back with Richard T. Bear right after this.
Walking around midnight. Let's go. It's nice. Don't say no. Flashing out like Neon Avenue. But I feel like a stranger. Feel like a stranger. Born around midnight. stranger. Feel alone, crazy, crazy now, crazy now. Hey. Feel like a stranger. Feel alone, crazy, crazy now. Hey, crazy now.